What is up, everyone? Chris Manning here from the Locked On Cavs podcast with my co-host Evan Damaro. On today's show, we're starting our Isaac Okoro little mini series here by looking at the good of Isaac Okoro. So if you're saying, "Hey, I don't think he's good," we're going to talk about the bad tomorrow and talk about his fit for the future team on Wednesday. So come back for the full picture here. That's all coming up today on Locked On Cavs. All right, the music you heard on the way in, at least in audio form, is from our friends at Astro Radio. Check them out wherever you listen to music, Apple Music, Spotify, etc. I'm Chris Manning, covering the cast for places like Diamond Up Rocks and SB Nation Fear the Sword. My co-pilot, Evan Damerl, is from Facebook's Right Down Euclid. Before we dive too deep into today's show, we'd like to thank today's sponsor of Locked On Cavs, Sakara. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish. Go to sakara.com/lockdown20 or enter code lockdown20 for 20% off at checkout at Sakara Nutrition. Evan, what's going on, man? How are you doing?
Caught me around. I was taking a sip of water, but I'm good, man. In the moving process right now. If push comes to shove and things work out nicely, maybe next week I'll be in a new setup, but we'll see. I'm good. How's your weekend been? How are you?
We're going. We're moving, continuing along here, just pressing along. The weather's getting good. Things are up. Things are up. Evan,
Were you a fan of the ungodly hot weather on Saturday? I
uh,
wasn't. I was miserable.
I wouldn't say I was miserable, but I just am so sick of the cold that I'm really kind of just ready for any sort of consistent warmth.
I'm okay with consistent warm, but like the humidity was just bad
Mm-hmm.
Saturday. And my new house doesn't have central air. We use window units, which is the only flaw with it. And I have my parents up there helping me with some stuff. And my dad's a bigger guy, and I was like, "You good?" He's like, "I'm sweating like a hog." And so, as soon as that storm hit, it was pleasant. But until then, I was just like, "Yeeks."
Yeah, stuff. All right, let's talk about Isaac Okoro. So first segment, we're going to talk about his shooting.
David Zavek's gonna make 1 million accounts and downvote this episode into oblivion.
Segment two, we're going to talk about his defense. In segment three, we're going to talk about some miscellany with the good. And again, so today is going to be the good of Isaac Okoro. Tomorrow is going to be the bad slash frustrating slash I don't know what to make of this of Isaac Okoro. And then Wednesday will be okay. So let's. This is what we think we know about Okoro. Where does this go, et cetera, et cetera? Because there's, I think, a lot to unpack with him. And Evan did a poll to see who we do next, and he finished second behind Texan. I think there's good reason for intrigue there. But Evan, so I want to start with the shooting because
Mm-hmm.
I think there is sort of a two sides of the coin to this. The percentage did go up. It went up 6%, 29% as a rookie, 35 in year two. He went from 24% on non-corner three-pointers to 33%. 36.8% at catch and shoot three pointers, was at 29.7 as a rookie. That is not nothing. His effective field goal percentage overall went up about 7%. He made a pretty drastic jump in points per shot attempt. Any way you want to measure like his effectiveness as a shooter and like being an effective offensive player to some degree, that went up. At the same time, his 3-point rate was like very slightly down. So it's not like you saw him like get to like league closer to league average as a shooter on better volume. It's like, hey, I'm going to take basically the same amount of shots
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to make more of them. But it's still, I think the part of this that is the other side of the coin is like, it does not feel like this was a big jump for Isaac Okoro, right? Like it doesn't, I don't like look at, even though like the numbers say he's a better shooter. He shot better this year. And that is a fact. It doesn't feel to me like I think of Okoro massively different as a shooter than I did after his rookie season.
I think it doesn't feel that way because, like you said, the numbers do quantify it. It's just Isaac's overall offensive impact wasn't really like quantifiable, if that makes sense. And I had to look it up for myself. Yeah, he did make 6% more of his 3-point attempts. Let me double check here. Oh golly.
It's
Yeah,
it's
no,
it's
he
six
made
it's
yeah, he
six
made
percent.
6% more of his 3-point attempts, but it was on a smaller volume, so it was about
Yeah,
0.9 less per game, which is where you have to kind of take it. And I think it's just people really zeroed in on Okoro's offensive limitations just because some of the rest of the Cavs were really hitting for the better part of the season, especially Garland, Allen, Mobley. And then if you look at Okoro, who's a starter, he was averaging 30 minutes per game, and like he was playing substantially more when he was starting for the Cavs. He did start 67 games for Cleveland this season, or 61 games for Cleveland this season, played in 67 overall. But I think defensively is where you really saw like the
Well,
huge leaps. But like you said,
we'll get into that. This is about the shooting. So like, where do you
I know it's
feel?
the shooting,
Yeah,
but like
but I'm
you
saying,
don't notice his overall impact because like you notice so many of his flaws on top of that. It's easy to get bogged down in all like just his limitations offensively to not notice some like the good other than the cutting, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point.
that's more of a tomorrow thing actually, in terms of like what
Oh.
it actually is, because it just doesn't feel like it's enough. There's a number that I'll pull up and kind of detail this, but like, look, I look at him as a shooter, and it's like I think you have to look at the fact that it's a higher number as something that is good. Like I think that you have to view that as something of what it is. And like you look at
He's not broken as a shooter still.
no, I think the question is like, okay, if this is an improvement he has made and it still doesn't feel like opposing defenses respect him, and it's a lot of corner threes, it's all, and it's still kind of average-ish, and it's not a lot else. Like the diet is kind of is what it is. And look, his usage rate is very low. It was 12% this year, it was 14% as a rookie. Like it's not exactly like this is a guy that's gonna have a ton of the ball in his hands. His offensive stuff is sort of magnified in this way.
Mm-hmm.
It leaves you sort of, I think, wanting to see, okay, is there something else he can add as a passer, as a cutter? Is there a little stuff he can add? Like, I think like, honestly, the thing I feel, when I was trying to think back to like what popped in my head about his offensive season growth, it's like, I felt like in transition, he was a little bit better with that Euro step that he likes to take. It's kind
Yeah.
of like a very Isaac Okoro Euro step in that it's very robotic. It's very stiff. It's like a muscular Euro step. Like he kind of uses his frame and leverages that opposite shoulder to peel across as he makes that move. But it's like, that feels like something that I'm like, he added this. He's more comfortable with that more so than like as a shooter. And it's just, I think I've been out on this note. Does like how the end of the year went stick in your head with this a little bit? Because for me it does. Because we could look at the numbers and say he's better and he improved. I just also look at like the Brooklyn game and the Atlanta game and the play-in where he was like often just left by himself and then wasn't on the floor for part of the Atlanta game, is like a real,
Mm-hmm.
what do I do with this sort of thing to say, did he improve, yes or no? And it's hard to kind of answer that.
I think it's trending in the right direction. That's what I was trying to find the words to say without like being overwhelmingly negative. Because like, yeah, there were times throughout the season, and you definitely made a point, and it's a correct point about how like against Atlanta in the play-in, against Brooklyn in the play-in, like he was kind of a non-factor, especially on offense. I guess he could provide you stuff defensively, but it's kind of detrimental sometimes when he's on the floor for you offensively. But when you look at these numbers, you're saying, okay, maybe in year 3 when a lot of players are supposed to make this leap, Isaac included, there's things that are trending upwards that say like, okay, he may never be like a plus shooter, but he could be a plus or a plus minus shooter just because like he's just teetering on being just okay enough to just kind of support the Cavs in terms of that regard.
Yeah, I think you look at him just be average. And it's like, if this is a trending like average
And that's not
as a
not a
shooter, like,
bad thing for him being average either.
no, like dunks and threes has him as like a little below average as a shooter relative to his position. Like trending that way, and it's a leap from year one. It's just like, is this? It didn't. I think for like what the team also needed, I think that's doing, and I think the other part of it. And tell me if you think this is fair or not fair. I think him being a former 5th overall pick plays into this a little bit, like in how we talk about this, right? I think there is a little bit more expectation when you're a top 5 pick that kind of throws some of this at it, and it's not like he's not a top 5 pick who stood out, and we can just label him as, I think, bad. It's a little more of like figuring out what he actually is like a little trickier. I think it seems like to me.
I think that's fair, but I also want to have the caveat of outside of LaMelo, Edwards, Pat Williams, and Tyrese Halliburton, like there's a pretty steep drop off in terms of talent in that draft class. You can make an argument for Devin Vassell. You can make an argument for Onyeka Okongwu, who we were both a fan of at the time. I mean, even Sadiq Bey too. Like he was solid, but or is solid with Detroit. But there's a pretty steep drop off. So I think Okoro being a 5th overall pick in a pretty weak draft class overall, I don't think should be held against him. But I mean, yeah, I guess you could take it into consideration. But I
No,
think everything
I don't
else you
mean
said
that
was
like
fair.
I'm not saying it matters to
Tyrese
me.
Maxey too. Goodness gracious, I forgot Tyrese Maxey was in this class.
Yeah, but he's like way later. I look at the 5th overall pick thing just as like I think there is just like expectation from like the way like the overall dialogue about him sort of get shaped because it's like he is this higher pick and there's more expectation. I don't
Yeah,
necessarily
he's a
believe that
top.
I think
I
it's
understand he's a top
yeah
5 pick, so you
yeah
expect like more of a contribution.
yeah. Can I give you Okoro's splits per month from 3-pointing real quick before we go into break because these are kind of wild.
Absolutely, my friend, lay it on me.
All right, so October 20%, bad. November 21.1% on
Still not good.
3.8 attempts per game. His highest number of attempts per game in a single month. December 45.7% on about 3 attempts per game. January down to 22.7. February 45% on about 2 attempts per game. March 45.2% on about 2 attempts per game again, and in April 33.3% in a 5-game sample. So it's a little bit of up and down, the motion of the ocean.
It's a little up and down for sure. I think where your concerns can really come though with his shooting is that the free throw line. You wonder if maybe he can get a little better because he's not broken shooting wise, but like mechanically he's not broken, but like he's stiff. Like we've talked about, like he's stiff offensively, just in many facets of the game. And at least this, as we head into break, is encouraging. Isaac owned up to this in his exit interviews where he said that he knows he's a good defensive player and there's a lot of stuff he needs to refine and fix offensively. And again, players really make that dramatic leap in year 3. So I think we're going to definitely see like a defensive leap from Okoro, but offensively, I'd really hone in on that and see like how he feels comfortable on the floor. Cause like there's clear ways he looks comfortable on the floor and the way the Cavs utilized him, but also again, like how the Cavs feel comfortable using him. And I think maybe like it's a little up and trending up at some points. You just have to find a happy medium where you can say, okay, he isn't a total detriment when you're on the floor. So defenses aren't all like they're going to sag off on him, but they don't want to sag off on him all the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we'll get into more of that on the Wednesday show when we kind of pick at his big picture stuff and how the Cavs maybe can, if there's questions about how they can support him best and maximize him. But first, Evan, we're going to continue talking about the good of him today after the break. We're going to talk about his defense, which remains his defining skill, at least broadly speaking. But first, going to tell everyone about our friends at Sakara Nutrition. Feeling your best starts with what you eat, and Sakara helps you live a healthy, balanced lifestyle and truly enjoy it. With delicious, plant-rich, transformational nutrition that builds a foundation for living within your best body. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. Their nutritionally designed, chef-crafted breakfasts, lunches, and dinners are made with powerful plant-rich ingredients, helping boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, and get your skin glowing. Plus, it's all delivered right to your door, ready to eat. Their functional plant-rich wellness essentials help you create a body you love living in. From their best-selling metabolism super powder to the foundation, their daily supplement packs, Sakara's products are designed to support your wellness goals anytime, anywhere. And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com/lockdown20 or enter code lockdown20 at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/lockdown20 to get 20% off your first order. Sakara.com/lockdown20. All right, back here on the Locked On Cavs podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Now, make sure to go to check out Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter, check that out on Substack, is joined by Richard Stayman, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock drafts, rankings, and of course, their big boards. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. Okay. Evan, thing 2 that I think remains pretty solid. I have a hard time articulating if it improved in a meaningful way. However you want to take sort of advanced data in this sense, like it doesn't indicate a massive leap, but I think he remains like very solid. And I think we just sort of now have a 2-year track record in that if Okoro's really good at one thing, it is like as a defender who isn't generating a lot of turnovers, isn't going to be a guy that I think is kind of locking down like your apex predator wing types, but like can be a very strong point of attack guy and handle that load. I mean, I think like the fact that we have now like a 2-year sample of that in itself is like a pretty positive thing about Okoro.
Yeah, I think it really is a positive thing about him. I think JB Bickerstaff giving a little bit of insight on how they utilized him defensively is kind of interesting as well, where they said, okay, in his rookie year, Isaac, we need you just to go out there and play hard against your assignment, whoever it is, because teams are going to force switches and things like that. And you kind of saw a lot of that. He drew not a ton of fouls, but he sometimes would get into foul trouble depending on who he was tasked with defending that evening. But in year two, the game finally slowed down for him a lot, and he was a point of attack defender. He's a good help defender, a good switch defender. I think him being so multifaceted and understanding like defensive schemes and concepts really makes him an ideal player to complement a lot of what the Cavs are doing. Like you said, there's not like a substantial leap, but for what it's worth, when he's paired with Darius Garland as the starting shooting guard for the Cavs are plus 6.6 per 100 possessions defensively, and that's definitely worth noting at least, just because Garland isn't ever going to be like physically just like a dominant defender. Like I think he's solid at times positionally, but there's going to be times he gets switched or pried off of and exploited. I think having Okoro is just like a point of attack defender or a help defender as well. If the Cavs forcing defensive switches too, just makes his life easier and maybe lets Darius expend more energy on offense where he's a lot more impactful.
I think I think like he still fouled like a relatively like kind of high amount, which kind of makes sense for
That's how he played at Auburn. Is he?
yeah, he's very like there's at least once a game where like Okoro like kind of knows he went like a little too hard. You know?
He plays juiced up a lot on defense, and which isn't a bad thing. Like it's not like you never have to question his effort on that side of the floor.
Correct. So the other thing I think about him that is held up, and I understand we're saying held up, we're saying like kind of very banal stuff, but like this is a guy that covers a lot of ground.
Yeah, he had a ton of mileage.
So I was looking at B-Ball Index and looking at like how much he moves on defense. Travels in the 92nd percentile of players in the NBA in terms of how much space he's covering at defense. He's chasing guys off ball at a very high level and does that a lot. He's like very good at just being around and like being a physical presence. It doesn't always lead to like very high, like very like effective shot contesting. It doesn't lead to a lot of steals, but like he's just kind of there and like is a very physical presence. Like there is value in sort of that being a thing. And like I understand that that is not going to be something that is like completely sexy, but like we have now I think a 2-year sample of a guy who is gonna be able to do this. And like the offensive stuff certainly skews this and how much you value this and all of this stuff. He's not the first player to kind of have this concern as far as what he is. I just kind of look at him and I just think like I would feel comfortable putting him on like if you're building on a defense and you're saying okay, we need to have someone guard like the team's leading guard or whatever. Like I kind of trust Okoro like to at least be able to handle that assignment to the best of his ability, as best as like not anyone, but like he's by far the Cavs' best option to kind of handle this stuff. And like it's not just like the best of bad options. Like I think he's legitimately proven to be a good option who works his ass off on that end of the floor.
Yeah, I don't think that's a stretch at all. It just depends on how the Cavs kind of build out this roster and build out the supporting cast they have around Garland, Mobley, and Allen. But like I can see Okoro being a key piece, just especially on the defensive side of the ball for a lot of the stuff you highlighted. And I think again, it's going to get better. I think now that he has a better understanding of NBA defensive concepts, he's not as raw, not as green on that end of the floor. He spent nights defending the likes of Harden, LeBron, KD, Kyrie, you name it. He's probably defended that person at this point in his career, and it doesn't look like he's overshadowed by the moment. Yes, there's times he's played a little bit too juiced up and like a little bit too amped on the floor, but I'm cautiously optimistic about his defensive upside just with this Cavs team. And again, I wonder if they use him as that potential as like a trade chip thing for him long term as well. If they want to maybe make more like a considerable roster upgrade, but I wouldn't be too quick to sell my stock on Okoro just because there's that tantalizing aspect of him maybe making a leap on both ends of the floor in year 3.
Is there a defensive thing you would look like? We talked the shooting is and maybe some secondary kind of ball movement stuff is the big thing for him on offense in year 2. Is there a defensive part of his game you would like to kind of see if there's going to be a leap on that end where he can go from like a guy that is like solid, definitely I think above average, but not quite like an all defense guy. If there's like a leap to be made to being like an all defense consideration guy, is there something you would say you would highlight as something he could get better at if we're going to kind of monitor this?
I don't know if all defense is necessarily within reach for him. Like I know he was all rookie his rookie season, and he was technically a rising stars contest.
So is Deion Waiters. God bless.
So yeah, so is Deion Waiters. So like, but this is the opposite of Deion Waiters. But if you look at his numbers per 36 based on his rookie season and sophomore season, he kind of looks like he plateaued in between those two. So the playing defense hard and physically without fouling, I think, is going to be where I'm looking at it in year 3 for him, because the numbers are almost identical. Like he averaged 3.1 fouls per game in his rookie year, 3.0 fouls per game his sophomore year. Like by his junior year, I think he's had enough time, enough understanding of how the NBA works, like how officials call games and things like that, to maybe be. Yeah, I mean, I think he already has the claim to fame of being Cleveland's best perimeter defender out the gates already, but to really like take him up to that upper echelon where he maybe isn't like Andre Roberson, like where he's such a liability offensively, where like he's intentionally fouled and sent to the
I think
line.
he's already
like that.
better than that. Not that that's like a high bar to clear, but I think he's probably better than that.
But I know, but Andre Roberson, like at his apex before the injuries, was really, 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 really good defensively.
Oh yeah, insane. Yeah,
so,
insane.
If he kind of continues like that kind of path, like I could see a trajectory like that where you can plug him in lineups and situations. You're like, okay, Isaac, we need you to go eat the best perimeter players' lunch and just kind of make their lives hell every time they're on the floor. And then that gives JB Bickerstaff maybe a little bit more luxury and versatility just in how he has to defend some of these beasts in the upper echelons of the Eastern Conference to really slow down some of the perimeter assaults. Because if you look at teams like Boston who are 3-point happy, if you can get Okoro to maybe make like Tatum or Brown uncomfortable, it makes the game a lot more easier for the Cavs. And maybe they're able to kind of keep within gunning range because they have stars at different positions that could make other teams uncomfortable on defense.
We'll talk about this more Wednesday because we're running 10 on time, but I think a jump on forcing turnovers, if that's ever going to happen, I'd like to kind of see it happen soon. It has been something he just doesn't do much of. Like, you just do a lot of forcing turnovers where he's gobbling guys up in that way. It's more of a very solid, very kind of makes your life really hard to get through him. But, he's not like kind of picking your pocket and creating points the other way. I think there's like, if there's like a couple of those splash plays, those could be kind of an important thing.
If you could play like a bit of like a free, it's interesting what they do in the draft too, because there's guys like Terry Eason who have really shot up his draft stock for doing something like that, where like they are just so active defensively and because they're so quick, they can get easy buckets in the fast break. Maybe if the Cavs either find him like a supporting partner, or if Isaac just becomes better as like a free safety type player, if there's just leaps from other players, like he could be really valuable in that regard too, reading lanes and just getting easy buckets in the open court as well.
Yeah, if that's a thing he can do and like add some points that way, that would be I think
if he can bolster his scoring 2, 3, 4 points a night just off easy steals and layups and dunks off those easy steals, like that's going to be huge for the Cavs. Obviously, like that's a pretty decent increase in terms of things too, but yeah, I think like that's like him like hitting his like apex defensively. Like if you want to see that, like being available on the floor without fouling and more steals, like that's definitely something that we'd both like to see, I'd say.
Yeah, and like look at quickly look up at he didn't like generate like he wasn't like near the top 100 like in steal percentage in college. Like maybe this is just something he's not good at, but if there's a leap to be had, that would be a big thing. All right, Evan, after the break, we're going to talk about some very smaller things on the edges here, particularly offensive rebounding and just the fact that some Cavs lineups with him were actually good. But you're going to first tell everyone about our friends at BetOnline.
Absolutely, my man. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and this news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all the sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and even more. Head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn about the trends in action. For instance, DeAndre Ayton, if he's not on the Suns, it's something you can bet on. The Pistons are the favorite at plus 125, and the Pacers are soon behind them at plus 400, and so on. And if you want to bet on Russell Westbrook's next team, if it's not the Lakers, the Pacers are the favorites at plus 300, but the Cavs are kind of there at plus 1400 as well. BetOnline, where the game starts, and the exclusive betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network.
All right, back on Cavs. Last segment today. This is like a very small thing, but I find it interesting that like he has a pretty good offensive rebounding rate for his position.
It was
It's like
actually neat when you like put that in the notes. I was like, huh, didn't know that. And I was looking at the numbers.
yeah, it's like a little wonky, and like I don't know how much it's like actually helping because I don't think of it as like it doesn't like pop into my brain, but it's like I think there's like a motor
Go
there.
ahead,
Like
go ahead and share what it is. We're kind of like
well,
edging
it's like
people right
so
now.
it's like 4%, which is like doesn't sound like a lot, but like that's pretty high for offensive rebounding, especially for wings. There's 3.2 the year before. Like I think that says that he's at least willing to crash and battle and stuff, and like and at least come in from the wing to try to do that. So that's kind of interesting. I think the bigger thing here, and this is like maybe poking at the bigger question of like, do we feel like Isaac Okoro is a guy you can win basketball games with? He was largely
so.
Say that again.
I think so.
I tend to think so as well, but I'm also like a little colder in him than I might have been a year ago, and we'll talk about that on Wednesday. He has largely been a part of lineups that are good, and I think this is kind of where we'll kind of crescendo today's show. Per cleaning the glass, they are plus 2.2 points better per 100 possessions with him on the floor for the year. The lineups he was most used in, the 5 most common, were all plus 10 points better per 100 possessions, all above average on defense. So I to me like this leads me to to ask the question, like, is it not just is he good or is he helpful? It's like how much he helps, how much is he moved needle overall, how much is he helping in those lineups. I think he's probably like we're kind of learning that he is like a role guy who has warts, which the NBA is full of, and navigating those can be sort of tricky, right? Like that isn't always the easiest thing to figure out. I think it's the question of like, okay, like if the Cavs are having success, where do we feel like he's actually fitting in and contributing to that? And like that's probably still what's unclear here, but it doesn't seem insignificant to me that like the lineups he's on most of the time are like performing pretty well. And it's not just like this like different versions of guys where he just happens to be there. There's different looks of those lineups. Like it's not just kind of a one kind of thing that then work into something else.
Yeah, I think he's like you said, the offensive rebounding percentage is just it's an interesting, like just neat factoid about him. But I think it does speak testament to the player Isaac Okoro is, where like you said, he plays physically, he plays hard on both ends of the floor, especially on defense. Like he's willing to crash the glass and just kind of bang down low, especially with the Cavs playing 2 bigs. There's opportunities to grab offensive boards and things like that. And even Okoro, who is really useful cutting on the baseline. If he misses like an easy bunny or an easy cut like that, he can grab a quick look, kick it out, or try and score again. Like there's opportunities there. And as like you said, our crescendo, I think he's a winning player for this Cavs team. I think he's a good complementary role player for the Cavs. It's just that's what he's at right now, as just a player who's wrapped up his second year in the NBA. He's a good complementary defensive role player for the Cavs, who has his warts offensively, especially at the free throw line and on the perimeter, where he can be not a liability, but like sometimes just concerning at points. But I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and wait till year 3 to say, okay, he's not a bust. We'll say that he's not a bust, but maybe the returns are underwhelming based on the pick, I guess, because like you said, the onus that's associated with it. But I think just now, like the baseline of what's good with Isaac Okoro is he provides you good help defense, positional defense, point of attack defense. He's multifaceted. He plays tough. He plays hard. And there's something there. I just think the Cavs need to work a little bit harder not harder, but continue to work hard on ironing out these warts and kind of figuring out what these deficiencies and just issues are. Like, I don't think he'll ever be like a Marcus Smart type player. Like, I don't see Isaac Okoro winning Defensive Player of the Year at any point in his career or being like an all defensive kind of guy. But like, he could be like a pretty upper class, like really high quality defensive role player who does some interesting things for you on offense. It's just trying to fit the pieces still into this puzzle to make it all make sense.
So like, I think I look at the playoffs, and I particularly look at teams like Miami and Boston, and I think Dallas as well. Maybe not Golden State. These teams have a bunch of guys who are not able to be attacked on the perimeter. They hold up to drives. They can't be hunted, right? Like they can sustain themselves in sort of these circumstances. Okoro's a guy that I think that if you're going to get him in a playoff situation and he gets to play defense and he's going to have to defend drive after drive after drive, I think that can be the thing. It's just like there's like a separation right now between what he is as a guy in year 2 versus like a Bruce Brown, who's kind of like the same thing, but like takes a few more threes, even though it's not like a lot. It's not really a lot, but he does some secondary playmaking. He slides into the dunker spot. He makes these little reads.
Well, let me ask you that then. Would you be disappointed if Isaac's apex is similar to Bruce Brown?
No, that's a damn good and useful NBA player. This is the thing.
Listeners, would you be disappointed if like, Isaac Okoro's apex was what Bruce Brown currently is for the Brooklyn Nets?
This is ultimately where I get to with a lot of this. I think there are like I come down on being a more glass half full person in this regard. Not all the time, but I think I like to think that there are, if depending on circumstance, depending on the coaching staff, depending on the individual person, right? Like there's a lot of factors that go into this. I think you can make most guys like find a role and succeed. It's just about timing and there's luck involved. There's all these factors involved that are very hard to discuss. And sometimes we're just throwing stuff at a wall and trying to figure this out. I think Okoro is a guy that if like the circumstances are right, I think you could do some interesting things with him, provided he continues to improve and stuff gets figured out. Is it a guarantee? No. But I feel like there's enough positive here to do something with. He's definitely like a big step down below the guys that are leading this Cavs roster right now. But if you told me that like I had to, if we were going to, maybe this is like an episode we should do later in the summer and once they do the draft and everything, but like maybe we do a draft of like, and we'll get some guests on to kind of make it a little spicier. Okay, like if you're going to draft a role player on this team to bank your future on this upcoming season, to be a guy that you think is going to have a good year and you would trust.
That's tough.
Like I would find him like an interesting choice because I think
I thought you were going to say he was your pick. So I'm like, my pick is Colin Sexton still, but like Sexton has his own questions health wise.
Yeah, like Sexton even exists in his own tier to me to some degree, right? Like he's the only thing, but if you're comparing him to like some other guys on this roster, it's not going to be the splashy 3-pointers.
Like, for like this draft, like it just wouldn't be Mobley, Allen, Garland. Like who would you pick after that? Like if you're ranking them kind of situation.
And it's not even just like ranking them how good they are in like a vacuum. It's like, okay, like how do you win with this player? Like do you trust them in their malleability? Because like all these guys have warts, but Okoro kind of provides. He's like the inverse of like. He's like the inverse of like the offensive splash player right now, and there's like a little bit of defensive stuff there, or a little bit of offensive stuff there, but not enough to make you feel great about it. It's like when there's like a very competent offensive role player who has these defensive issues that you're not sure if the offense can sustain the kind of ed defense. It's like the opposite question of that with him right now, I think. And is that a good place to leave this, Evan? I think we should leave it there.
I think we should leave it there. It's an interesting way to close the door on this.
Until Dave tomorrow Zabak, when we talk about it more.
When Dave Zabak like gets like he's just like feels like the Hulk, like just covered in gamma radiation.
David doesn't do podcasts, and also Sunderland got promoted his team, so he's probably pretty thrilled right now.
Well, that's great. I hope it comes with a good pay raise, full benefits, and a company car for Sunderland. So until next time, folks.
All right, tomorrow we're going to talk about the bad of Okoro, and obviously we'll talk about some of the offense in detail there. And Wednesday we're going to talk about where he sort of fits into this and sort of pick at like how you kind of plan with him going forward and as he heads into year 3. Later in the week we'll also be kind of doing some episodes on Dyson Daniels. Thursday will be a deep dive, and Friday we're hoping to have a special guest who recently talked to Dyson Daniels and wrote about him to talk about Mr. Dyson Daniels. So that should be a ton of fun. Evan, take us out.
As always, folks, thank you for checking us out. I hope you had a great weekend. But if you're listening to us on audio form, come subscribe to us on YouTube. We're almost at 1,500 subs, and we'd really appreciate you getting us over the edge there. Would mean a lot, and then we'd be on the goal for 2K at this point. But if you're listening to us on YouTube and watching us, I guess, just hit subscribe. And if you haven't checked us out on audio, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Notice we have a 4.3 on Spotify compared to the 5.0 on Chase Down. So let's cook those books, as Justin Rowan would say. Give us a 5.0 rating so you can get us up there so we can be the upper ranking Cleveland Cavaliers podcast like we deserve to be. But until next time, I'm Evan Damerel. He is Chuckaroonie Manning. We'll see you tomorrow.
Also, might have some important podcast production news. Fun stuff with that coming soon.
Oh yeah. Also, I could just say it if you want.
No, let's build. We're gonna have him. I want to announce that via him popping in to the bat, just popping in on this episode.
Oh, well,
All right.
I'm going into his ego too much. See you until then, guys. Bye.
Bye.